In the next project, we want to look at how to use an image control to display images. So here's the project. I've got 6 buttons with different animal names on them, and we can click the button and see the image of the animal. So there's the lion, tiger, grizzly, cougar, elephant, and giraffe. But before we look at building this project, we need to talk about images in general and how they're used in Xamarin. The biggest challenge in creating Xamarin cross-platform projects is the number of different devices that we have to design for. Even just on the iPhone side, just in the last few years, there have been several different sizes that came out of the iPhone. Going back to the iPhone 4, it was 640 by 960 pixels, and now we have things like the iPhone XS Max that's 1242 by 2688, much larger resolution. If we're going to place an image on the iPhone 4 and then show it on the iPhone X Max, it would look a little small on that device. And if we designed an image for the iPhone SX Max and showed it on the iPhone 4, it wouldn't fit. So that's one of our challenges we have. And it's not just the fact we have all these iPhones, we also have iPads, which also introduce different dimensions in different resolutions. And then we have the Retina phones now that are higher resolution. So the way Xamarin handles this, actually it's the way the Android, the iPhone, and the Windows platforms handle this, is to have images in different sizes. So I'm going to focus down here first on the iPhone, or the iOS. This would be for iPhone and iPad. Apple requires there to be 3 different resolutions of every image. The original image here would be on the original iPhone, and this really isn't used much anymore. We're really not designing for those phones. Everything we're using is probably 2x and 3x. But the 2x then is really 4 times that size, and then the 3x is considerably larger. So it's 3 times that size. Actually 9 times the size when we figure 3 by 3. So we have to create an image and name it, and we name the image. In this case, the image is called lion, but we put an @3x.png or .jpg, whatever the file extension is. So the resolution to the 2x has to be named the name of the file @2x. And then, of course, we have the name of the file @1x, and then the extension. So 3 different images. We'll look at where they go in our Xamarin project. The Android side's even worse because there's actually over 1,000 Android phone developers or phone manufacturers out there, and there's something like 18,000 different Android devices. And we start thinking about things like Android TV or Apple TV. That even makes this even more difficult. So on the Android side, we have 5 different resolutions. The lowest resolution is just named by the file, lion.png, and it goes into a folder called drawable in the resources. Then we have the same file name, but this one is twice the size. It goes into a folder called drawable-hdpi, high DPI. Then we have drawable-xhdpi. This is the extra high DPI. Again, same file name, just different folder. Then we have the drawable XX, extra high DPI. And then finally we have a folder called drawable-xx-hdpi, the extra high DPI, same file name, just different size. So when we create these files, we've got to put them in different folders because they are named the same, or name them on our computer before we bring them to Xamarin, and then change the names in these different folders. It's a lot of work. I will show you a shortcut that I've created to be able to make this much simpler. I'm going to show you the hard way first, but let's also look at the Windows side. On the Windows side, we have 3 different images. We have the original size image at 100, then double that, and then quadruple that at 400. Now, when we design these things, I like to use Photoshop, which really is the industry standard for working with graphics, and I highly recommend you develop some Photoshop skills if you want to be a software developer, because everything is so visual these days. You always want to design for the highest resolution first and then scale down. If you design for the smallest size, you might think, well, I want to design for the 1x and then scale it up. But if you do that, these being bitmap images, In photographs, they're going to look horrible, because what's going to happen is you're taking the pixels from this 1x size and you're expanding it into 2x. Rather, you want to start with your largest size and then resize it down, and Photoshop does a great job of figuring out what to get rid of to maintain the integrity of the image. So let's look at the Android side. In Xamarin, in your Android project, you're going to have a resources folder, and in that folder is going to be a drawable folder, a drawable HDPI, a drawable XHDPI, a drawable XXHDPI, and a drawable XXX HDPI. You're going to place your images into those different folders based on their resolution. So I said this line here, I designed it for 600 by 600. That would not really fit a full screen of a tablet very well, or one of these larger devices. But for the phones that we're working on, it's going to be fine. Sometimes you have to design these images much larger, and so there's something like a 4K TV, these are going to be much larger images. So always design for the largest and then scale down. On the iOS side, we have a folder called assets.xc for Xcode assets. And we open up that folder and we see this area down here where on the left hand side we can add image sets. And each image set is of an image. On the Mac you can right click and add it. On the PC in Visual Studio there's a little plus sign in the upper left hand corner to add a new image set. And then the image set, we're working with universal, so it's basically 1x, 2x, and 3x. And universal is what we could use for both iPad and iPhone. There are some other resolutions for Retina and things like that, but for our practical purposes, and this is the way developers have been doing this for a long time, we have a 1x, 2x, and 3x. And all we do is we simply drag the images to these three boxes for the 1x, the 2x, and the 3x. And we do that for each one of our images that we want to use. For Windows, it's very similar in that we're going to take the three sizes of our image and simply place them in the root folder of our package. Now it's a little confusing because there is an assets folder, and you would think they go into the assets. They do not. They need to go in the root folder of your project. I'm going to give you a quick little lesson in Photoshop. I can't spend a lot of time here. We have 2 3-credit courses in Photoshop, a beginning and advanced. There's a lot of bells and whistles in Photoshop, a lot you can do. I'm going to show you how to get some images off the internet that are public domain to use in your projects, and where we want the images to all be the same size, and how to do that in Photoshop and add some text and then export these. So let's jump over to Photoshop. I'm in Photoshop on the PC, but it really is pretty much the exact same program on the Mac. I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to go to the File menu, say New. And in the dialog box, I can choose what size my project is going to be. The last project I worked on was 600 by 600 pixels. That's came up as a default. That's actually what I want. We're going to create some images for our animals Xamarin project. And 600 by 600 is a nice square image, a fairly good size, and it'll look decent on the phones. So I'm going to choose Create. And here is our image with a white background. Over on the right hand side is our toolbox. These are the tools we have to work with our images. Color palette over here. Some properties and information about our project. And then the layers area down here is kind of the key thing, because we're going to build our images by putting things on top of one another. So for example, I want to put the image in here, and then I want to put some text on top of that as far as the licensing use of that image. So 600 by 600 pixels, I want to find some public domain or some Creative Commons licensed images that we can use without having to pay any royalties. So if, as you're working on projects and you're going to distribute things or publish things, be aware that most images out on the internet are copyrighted. So you want to find images that you're free to use. You may have to provide some attribution as to the photographer. I'm just giving them some credit. But oftentimes you can find some stuff that will work for what you want to do. Or you can purchase stock photos from places like Adobe or lots of other sources where you're paying so much for each image. And they have tons and tons of images to choose from, and you pick the one that's going to meet your project. So a great place to find images is at wikipedia.org. We've all used Wikipedia to look up information, but they have this area called the Commons. These are freely usable photos and more. And these are the photos they have inside their articles. People have made available to them and give them the license and gave them the right to be able to redistribute those in most cases. So I'm going to find a picture of a cougar. Since we're the South Mountain Cougars, let's go find a cougar image. And I can scroll down and see the various images of cougars that have been put into this repository. And as I look, I see this one that I really like. I'm going to click on it. So I see some information about the image, where it was taken. I can scroll through the images left and right. This is the one I want, though. I'm going to look at the more details. And in the more details, I see that there's different resolutions available. And there's one here that's 1024 by 768. That's closest to the size I want. I want something of the size I need or a bit larger because I can scale it down. And I'm looking at the information here that this came from Flickr. And it says this file is licensed under Creative Commons Attributes 2.0 generic license. You are free to share it, to adapt the work, as long as you give attribution to the author. So the author in this case is just Art G. And we're going to put some text on this image that says this is Computer Commons licensed image, and the photo is by Art G. So I'm going to get the image. I'm just going to right click on the, oops, before I do that, I need to get the larger size. So I'm at the 1024 by 765. There's the cougar. I'm going to right click on it, copy it, and then I'm going to go to Photoshop. And I have this background layer that's all white. I'm going to go to the edit menu and choose paste. And there's my cougar. When I brought the image in, it didn't fit my 600 by 600 size. It's much larger than that. But I can resize it to fit the area that I want. My image came in as layer 1. I'm going to rename that by clicking on it and just choose cougar. Then I'm going to go to the edit menu and come down to transform and choose scale. And we can see the bounding box of the size of the image in comparison to our project size. I'm going to grab the upper left hand corner, place my mouse pointer there. I'm going to hold down the shift key, which will constrain the proportions so I don't distort the image. Nothing worse than having an image where we made somebody look overly fat or overly thin. So we want to always resize proportionally so that nothing looks abnormal. I'm going to hold down the shift key. I'm going to drag, and you'll see I'm dragging my image, and it kind of goes off the screen here a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to let go. Then inside the image, I'm just going to grab it and drag it. I'm going to put it back up here in the upper left-hand corner area. And then I'm going to grab this bottom right-hand corner, hold the shift key down. I'm just going to drag it down so it kind of fits. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to simply move this over a little bit to where I want it. Making sure it is covering our project size window. And press the enter key to accept those changes. And that looks pretty good to me. Now I want to add some text for the attribution of this image. So I'm going to go to the text tool. It's a little T here in the toolbox. And up here at the top I can choose a font. I can choose a font style and a font size. What my alignment should be, left, center, or right. And then the color that I want. And the color you can click here, it brings up a color picker, and you have access to your 16.7 million different colors. I actually want this to be black. It's going to be black down here against this white background. It's going to show up really nicely. Sometimes you might need white text against a dark background or a different color. And I've already done this before, so I know that the font I want is Calibri Bold and 18 point. Sometimes you have to experiment with that a little bit. So I'm going to click here, and I've got it set for left alignment. And I'm just going to type what I want. I want Creative Commons licensed. I'm going to put in parentheses here Wikipedia. And then I'm going to say photo by Art G. Now I can take the Move tool, which is the very top tool in the toolbox, and I can grab that text, because that text is on a separate layer. If you look in the layers, I have my cougar and the text is on a layer above that. I can grab that and move it around without moving the cougar. So I'm going to put it where I want it. I think that looks pretty good. And now that's my image. I'm going to save this. So I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Save As. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this Cougar 3 because you've seen that in previous demos I've already done a Cougar and a Cougar 2. So I'm going to call it Cougar 3, and it's going to be a Photoshop document.psd. Now you'll notice there's several other folders in this project because we're going to create different versions of this as a PNG file or a JPEG file and put those different versions in these folders that we can easily work with Xamarin then out of these folders. So in your project, as you're saving this to a file area, you're going to have to create these different folders. Drawable-HDPI, Drawable-XHDPI, those folders we talked about earlier. I have a folder just for my iOS and a folder for the UWP because all those images can stay together. But for the Android, you've got your 5 different folders here. All right, I'm going to save this. And I'm going to go ahead and accept the compatibility. And now I need to be able to save this image out to those different folders. So if you remember the graphic we saw earlier in terms of the different sizes we need. So with this 600 by 600, I need this size, my largest size, for the XXX HDPI of Android and the Scale-400 of UWP. So I'm going to go to the File menu. I'm going to choose Save As. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see this maybe better. So what I want for my save as type is not a PSD file. Now I want this to be, let's say it's going to be a JPEG. So I'm going to do JPEG, JPG, and I'm going to give it a name. So this is Cougar 3, but it's going to go into the XXX HDPI folder. So I'm going to open up that folder. That's where I want it to go. And I'm just going to say Save. For JPEGs, it'll ask you for a compression level. I usually use about 7. 7 still looks pretty good, makes it a little bit smaller file. I'm going to say OK. And now that's done. Okay, it's still a PSD file. It doesn't change the file. We just saved it as a JPEG. It's still PSD. So I'm going to come back and do that again. Save As. This time I want it to go into my UWP folder. And then after the Cougar 3, I'm going to choose JPEG again. And after the Cougar 3, but before the .jpg, I'm going to add a .scale-400 and say Save. Right, now I need to resize this down from 600 to 75% of that, which would be 450 by 450. To resize the image, we can go to the Image menu, come down to Image Size, and you can type in 450 by 450. If this little chain link is present, as you change the width, the height will change automatically. This is a toggle you can turn off. So if that's not turned on, you have to do them individually. So you generally want that turned on. We're going to set this to 450. Notice the height changed. I'm going to say OK. There's my image resized. And now I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Save As. This time it's going to go into the XX HDPI. I'm going to save it again as a JPEG. Go into my folder and click Save. Now I need the same size in the iOS side, so I'm going to go File, Save As, iOS, make it a JPEG, and here, this is my 3x, so after the 3, Cougar 3, I'm going to do an @ symbol and type 3x. It still is a .jpg. So I'm going to say Save. And then I need to resize this again. and save again, and so forth. So that's the process. You can see it takes quite a while to do this. I'm going to show you another way to do this that is actually a little bit easier, which is much easier. I'm going to go back. Over here is the history. So I'm going to hit my history button, and I can work backwards into the history. So I've changed the image size. I'm going to go back above that and just go to move at this point. So there's my original 600 by 600 with the text layer that I created. And to demonstrate this, I'm just going to save it again. So I'm going to go File, Save As. So this time I'm going to call it Cougar 4. Now I want this to be a PSD file again. And I put two scripts out in Canvas. These are JavaScript files that I've created, and we can automate Photoshop by using JavaScript files. So I'm going to go into Canvas and show you where those are. So I've logged into Canvas, gone to our course site, CS162AD. This is for our cohort, including CS165DC and 262AD. We're going to go into the modules area, and we'll scroll down the modules to the general resources. And at the bottom here, there is two JSX files. These are JavaScript files. Xamarin Export JPG XXX and Xamarin Export PNG XXX. And I had an older version before they came out with the XXX demand, so that's why these are labeled with XXX. Each one of these I want to download to my system, and these are going to let me do some automation. So I'm going to click on this link, and then in Canvas I'm going to choose the download option here. And we can see down here, in this case, Google Chrome is downloading this. And I want to know basically where it's saved, so I can be able to find it later. I'm going to do the same thing for the other one for the PNG. So once you have those two script files downloaded, now we can automate Photoshop. So I'm going to jump back over to Photoshop. So we have our PSD document here, 600 by 600, named Cougar 4. I'm going to come down to over to the File menu, go down to Scripts, and choose Browse. And then I have some scripts here. So here is that Xamarin Export.jpg XXX.jsx. I'm going to choose that and say Load. And that file is going to ask me some questions. It's going to ask me to give a name of my project. I'm going to leave it called Cougar 4. Actually, just so you can see this, I'm going to name this SMCC. And I'm going to say OK. What compression do I want to use? Since it's the JPEG, I'm going to leave it at 7. Say OK. And it comes back and says completed file exports. That took maybe 5-10 seconds at the most. So I'm going to say OK. And let's go look at our project folder. So over here in the drawable folder, I have SMCC file, and it tells me it's 75 by 75 pixels. In the drawable HDPI folder, same file, name the same thing. This one's 150 by 150 pixels. XHDPI. This one is 300 by 300. This one is 450 by 450. And the last one here in the XHDPI is our 600 by 600 image. Placed in the appropriate folders. And then we have an iOS folder. In that iOS folder, here are my 3 files for the SMCC. SMCC at 1x, SMCC at 2x, and SMCC at 3x. This one's 450 by 450, 300 by 300, 150 by 150. And then finally, the UWP folder, we have our Cougar, our smcc.scale-100.jpg, 150. Here's the scale-200, 300 by 300, and the scale-400, 600 by 600. That's how we can set up our images, and you can use those scripts to make this a little bit faster. I do ask you do not distribute these scripts to anybody else. These are just for my students taking this class, and I'm looking at other ways to distribute this to the public. That little tool hopefully is worth its weight in gold for you in saving some time. I encourage you to work on some Photoshop skills. That will make your life that much better and make you that much more marketable as a software developer. In the next video, we will actually create the project where we're going to use these images.